The last thing my father said to me before slamming the door was, "Love won't pay the bills." I remember standing there, drenched in rain and heartbreak, clutching the hand of the man they said would ruin me. They didn't know that the poor man they despised would become my greatest blessing, and that one day, they'd be the ones knocking on my mansion's door, begging for help. When I walked out of my family's mansion with nothing but a suitcase and a wedding ring, they laughed. "You'll come crawling back," my mother sneered. But I never did. Years later, when I pulled up to that same mansion in a black luxury car, the millionaire they once called a disgrace, their laughter turned to stunned silence. The rain poured hard that evening, drenching the cobblestones of the small town where I stood, suitcase in hand, heart pounding with both fear and freedom. My name is Emily Hart, and that night, I walked away from everything, my family, my home, and the privileged life I'd known since birth. They told me I was a disgrace for marrying Jacob, a man who didn't come from money, a man who worked as a mechanic with oil-stained hands and a heart bigger than any fortune I'd ever known. They laughed when I said I'd choose love over luxury. My mother's voice still echoed in my head, sharp and cold as glass. "You'll come crawling back when he fails you." But I didn't. For years, Jacob and I struggled. We lived in a tiny apartment where the ceiling leaked and the heater worked half the time. We shared one old mattress on the floor, laughing at how broke we were, whispering dreams of something better. He'd work long hours fixing cars while I took shifts at a diner, scrubbing tables, serving coffee, and trying not to think about the mansion I once called home. I missed the warmth of family dinners, but I couldn't bring myself to regret my choice. Every time Jacob smiled at me, every time he told me I was worth more than their millions, I knew I'd made the right decision. Still, nights were hard. Some days, we barely had enough to buy groceries. Once, I saw my parents' photo in a magazine, smiling, perfect, holding champagne flutes at a gala. It stung. My mother's words came back again. "He'll never give you the life we can." She was wrong. Jacob had a mind sharper than any CEO I'd ever met. He was always tinkering, inventing, thinking. One night, while eating ramen noodles, he told me his dream: to design an engine that could revolutionize fuel efficiency. "It'll take years," he said, "but if I can build it, we'll never have to worry again." I saw the fire in his eyes, that same hunger I felt every time I thought about proving them wrong. We spent nights in the garage, tools clattering, metal screeching, the air thick with the smell of grease and hope. I started learning business basics online, determined to help him turn his idea into a company. I registered the business name under my own, Hart Innovations. It felt poetic, reclaiming my family name and reshaping it into something of my own. The first investors laughed us out of meetings. They saw two broke dreamers with no fancy degrees, no corporate background. But I kept pushing. I learned to pitch, to talk numbers, to sell vision. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. to email prospects and go to bed at midnight after balancing books that barely had any balance at all. Slowly, one yes came after dozens of no's. That first check, $50,000 from a small investor who believed in us, felt like a miracle. Jacob's invention became a prototype, and soon, we had a product that worked. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to catch the attention of bigger players. The next few years blurred into a rush of conferences, meetings, and sleepless nights. By the time we hit our 5th anniversary, Hart Innovations was worth millions. We moved into a house, not a mansion, but one filled with love, laughter, and the kind of peace money can't buy. And then came the day I never thought would arrive, a letter from my mother. "Emily, your father's company is struggling. We could use your advice. Please come home." I read it over and over, the words almost unreal. The same family that had disowned me, that had laughed at my choices, now wanted my help. I folded the letter neatly, set it on the table, and looked at Jacob. "They need us," I said, with a small, satisfied smile. When I walked back into their mansion years later, everything looked smaller. My mother's eyes widened when she saw the car I drove, the clothes I wore, not designer labels, but success worn with quiet confidence. My father looked tired, defeated. Their business, once untouchable, was on the verge of collapse. "We need investors," he said. "We thought maybe you could connect us with your company." I took a long pause, studying the man who once told me love wouldn't pay the bills. "Funny," I said softly, "I remember when you said Jacob and I wouldn't make it." My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Emily, we were wrong. Please, this isn't about the past. It's about family." Family. The word hit differently now. For years, I'd cried over being abandoned by mine. Now they were using it as a lifeline. I smiled politely, sipping my coffee, savoring the taste of poetic justice. "I'll think about it," I said, though I already knew my answer. Weeks passed before I sent my reply. It was short, businesslike. "After reviewing your company's position, I'm afraid Heart Innovations will not be investing. Best of luck." That night, Jacob and I toasted under the stars. "You did it," he said. "You proved them wrong." But it wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need their approval to be whole. Months later, I saw another magazine cover, this time, my face on it, with the headline, "From Disowned to Dominant, the woman who built an empire from scratch." My parents must have seen it too, because another letter arrived. This one wasn't asking for money. It was just 2 words, "We're proud." I didn't respond. Instead, I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and smiled to myself. Because sometimes, silence is the sweetest revenge of all. Years later, I started a foundation for women who'd been cast aside, doubted, or disowned. I called it Second Chances. Every time I helped another woman rise, I felt the same fire that had once kept me going through nights of hunger and heartbreak. Success, I realized, isn't just about money. It's about building something beautiful out of what others tried to break. And when people asked me what motivated me, I'd tell them, with a soft, knowing smile, they said I couldn't survive without them. So I learned to thrive without them. Because in the end, revenge didn't look like ruining them. It looked like becoming everything they said I couldn't be, and doing it with grace. The night I walked away from my parents' mansion, the rain felt like the sky itself was crying for me. My shoes were soaked, my dress clung to my body, and my heart felt heavier than the suitcase I carried. I turned back one last time to see the grand house where I'd grown up, every window glowing with golden light, every inch screaming of wealth and privilege. But inside, it was cold. Inside, it was cruel. I thought of my father's disgusted glare and my mother's sneer when she said, "You're throwing your life away for a mechanic." I almost believed them. Almost. But then Jacob's voice echoed in my mind, warm, steady, full of promise. "We'll make it, Emily. Maybe not right away, but we will." We didn't have a plan that first night. We just had each other. Jacob took my hand and led me to his beat-up old truck, the one my father once called a pile of rust. I remember how he squeezed my fingers and whispered, "You're safe now." I believed him. We drove to a small town 2 hours away and rented a one-room apartment. It smelled like dust and loneliness, but when Jacob laid his jacket on the floor for me to sit on, it felt like home. The first few years were brutal. We scraped by on almost nothing. I worked double shifts at a diner where the smell of frying oil clung to my hair, while Jacob worked late at the auto shop. Sometimes, we'd sit together at 1 a.m. on the floor, eating instant noodles, laughing about how poor we were but how rich our hearts felt. I'd tease him, my parents would die if they saw me eating noodles out of a cup. He'd grin and say, "Then I guess it's good they don't visit." But the truth was it hurt that they didn't. Holidays passed, birthdays came and went, and no one called. I sent one letter that first year. My mother sent it back, unopened. That was when I decided they'd never break me again. Jacob was my strength, but he was also a dreamer. He spent nights sketching designs and scribbling ideas for a new kind of engine that could run cleaner and longer than anything on the market. I didn't understand much about mechanics, but I understood passion, and Jacob had it burning through his veins. He'd come home with grease on his hands and ideas in his eyes, saying things like, "If I could just get the funding, I could build something that changes everything." We didn't have investors, but we had each other. I sold my engagement ring to buy his first set of tools. I picked up extra shifts and started reading business books borrowed from the library. I learned how to write business plans, how to pitch ideas, and how to make people believe in us. The world wasn't kind to dreamers without pedigrees. We were rejected over and over again. I'd walk into investor meetings where men in suits looked me up and down like I didn't belong. One of them even said, "Come back when you've got real credentials." That night, I cried in the car. Jacob took my hand and said, "They'll wish they hadn't said that someday." It took 5 long years before that day came. Jacob's prototype finally worked. It was efficient, powerful, and revolutionary. We named it Eclipse Drive because it symbolized something that outshone the rest. I handled the marketing, reaching out to every contact I could find. Slowly, people started noticing us. First small investors, then bigger ones. One deal led to another. Heart Innovations, our company, was born. Within 2 years, we were being featured in tech magazines. By our 7th year of marriage, Jacob and I had gone from struggling newlyweds to millionaires. I still remember the first time I walked into our new home, a modern glass house overlooking the city skyline. Jacob twirled me around in the living room and said, "You built this, Em. You made them eat their words." And he was right. My parents, however, hadn't changed. I hadn't heard from them in nearly a decade. Until one morning, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's voice trembled on the other end. "Emily, it's your father. His company's in trouble. They're talking about bankruptcy. We thought maybe you could help." I almost laughed. The same people who told me I'd amount to nothing now wanted me to save them. I said I'd think about it. But deep down, I knew what I would do. When I drove up to the mansion, our old mansion, the gates were still there, but the shine had faded. My father looked older, defeated. My mother's makeup couldn't hide the worry lines etched into her face. "You look well," she said, forcing a smile. "I am," I replied simply, my tone calm but sharp. "Life's been good." They sat me down and began explaining their company's downfall, bad deals, poor leadership, failed expansions. They wanted me to invest through Heart Innovations to bail them out. My father leaned forward, desperate. "Emily, I know we've made mistakes, but this is business. Help us and we can move past everything." I looked at him for a long time. This man once told me that love wouldn't feed me, that my husband would never be worthy, that I'd come crawling back. But I never did. Now he was the one crawling. "I'll think about it," I said again, standing to leave. It's just business, after all. A week later, I sent them a letter, short, professional, final. "After reviewing your financial situation, Heart Innovations declines to invest. I wish you the best." I didn't feel anger anymore. Just peace. Months later, the news broke that their company had gone bankrupt. Their mansion was sold. My mother sent one more letter. "We're proud of you, Emily." We were wrong. I didn't reply. Some things didn't need words. Instead, I focused on what mattered, building a future filled with purpose. Jacob and I started a foundation to support young inventors and women entrepreneurs. I made sure no one with a dream would ever be laughed out of a room again. Every time I handed out a grant or cut a ribbon, I thought of the girl I used to be scared, shivering in the rain, walking away from everything she knew. Now, when I looked back, I didn't see loss. I saw rebirth. My parents' rejection had forged me into something stronger than privilege ever could. And the greatest irony? The empire they tried to protect from a poor man was gone. The empire I built with that same man thrived. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's not about destruction or shouting "I told you so." It's about rising so high that your success becomes a mirror they can't bear to look into. I didn't ruin them. I didn't need to. I simply lived so well that their cruelty became irrelevant. Now, when journalists ask what motivated me, I always smile and say, the best decisions are the ones that hurt at first, but heal forever. Because love made me stronger. Rejection made me relentless. And success? That was the sweetest revenge of all. The years after my parents' fall were strange ones, a quiet mix of satisfaction and reflection. I didn't celebrate their downfall publicly. I didn't have to. The world saw the contrast on its own. Reporters began writing articles about Hart Innovations, the power couple who built a green future, from poverty to progress, Emily and Jacob Hart, America's new visionaries. Each headline carried a certain poetry, each one a silent echo of the insults my parents once threw at me. I didn't gloat, but I did smile every time I saw my name in print, not as Emily, daughter of William and Catherine Morgan, but as Emily Hart, CEO. Jacob and I were stronger than ever, bound by years of shared struggle. We never forgot the nights we went to bed hungry, the humiliation, the exhaustion. That pain became the foundation of our empire. We worked side by side. I handled investors, strategy, and branding, while he continued perfecting his designs. One afternoon, while reviewing new prototypes at the office, Jacob looked up at me, grease on his hands, and said softly, "You know, I think your parents did us a favor." I tilted my head. "By disowning me?" "By forcing you to prove them wrong," he said with that crooked smile of his. "You wouldn't be you otherwise." I knew he was right. The woman who once cried in the rain had turned into someone even I barely recognized, poised, confident, ruthless when she needed to be. But fate, as always, has a strange sense of humor. A few months later, I received an invitation to the Metropolitan Philanthropy Gala, a high-profile charity event for entrepreneurs and innovators. I was one of the keynote speakers. The theme was redefining legacy. I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw the sponsors list, Morgan Enterprises. My parents' old company, or what remained of it, had been bought by a private equity firm and rebranded. But they were still somehow involved, probably as desperate consultants. Jacob noticed my hesitation. "You don't have to go if you don't want to." "Oh, I'm going," I said. "I think it's time they see what legacy really looks like." The night of the gala was like stepping into a movie. Flashing cameras, soft jazz, diamonds, champagne, all the things I used to associate with my old life. I wore a sleek black gown, minimal jewelry, and confidence like armor. As I stepped into the grand hall, I caught sight of my parents across the room. My father's hair had gone almost completely gray. My mother's posture wasn't as proud as it once was. They looked smaller, like ghosts of who they used to be. When our eyes met, my mother's hand trembled around her wine glass. My father gave a stiff nod. I returned it, polite, distant, final. After dinner, I took the stage. The crowd applauded politely as I began my speech. When I was young, I started my voice study. I thought legacy meant bloodlines and wealth. I thought it was about who your parents were, what family name you carried. But life has a way of teaching you that legacy isn't inherited. It's built. It's what you create when no one believes in you. A hush fell over the audience. My mother's lips parted slightly, eyes glistening. My father looked away. My husband and I started our company in a one-room apartment with nothing but a borrowed wrench and a dream. We built an engine that changed the world, not because of privilege, but because of perseverance. So to anyone here tonight who's ever been told they're not enough, remember this: sometimes being cast out is the beginning of becoming unstoppable. The applause was thunderous. I caught Jacob's proud grin in the crowd and felt tears sting my eyes. Afterward, my mother approached me. Her voice quivered. "You spoke beautifully, Emily." "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated before whispering, "We never stopped loving you. We just didn't understand." I met her gaze and smiled softly. "I know, but love should never need understanding to exist." Then I turned and walked away before she could respond. The next morning, photos from the gala were everywhere. Emily Hart's speech brings crowd to tears. The self-made millionaire who redefined legacy. The world loved the narrative, the daughter who rose above, the woman who conquered the odds. But what mattered most wasn't fame. It was the quiet victory of peace. Months later, I found out my parents had sold what little remained of their assets and moved to a small town. Occasionally, I'd get word through distant relatives that they watched my interviews on TV. My mother apparently recorded every one of them. One day, I received a package, an old leather photo album. Inside were childhood photos of me, my first day of school, my graduation, family vacations. On the last page, my mother had written in trembling handwriting, "We're sorry. We see you now. Love, Mom." I didn't cry. I simply closed the album and placed it on a shelf in my office. Some apologies don't erase the past, but they do close the door gently. Years later, standing on the balcony of my penthouse overlooking the city skyline, I realized something profound: success had never been about proving them wrong. It was about proving me right. I took a deep breath of the crisp evening air, the lights below flickering like memories, and whispered to myself, I made it. Jacob came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "The past," I said softly. "And how far away it feels now." He kissed my shoulder. "You turned your pain into power, Em. Not everyone can do that." I smiled. That's what revenge really is: living so well that the people who hurt you can't stand it. And somewhere in that moment, surrounded by love, success, and peace, I realized my story wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about transformation. Because I wasn't the girl they disowned. I was the woman they could never control. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge of all. The night my parents disowned me replayed in my mind for years like a haunting film reel: the sharp crack of my father's voice, my mother's silence, the finality in their eyes. That memory became both my curse and my compass. I had no family name, no financial support, no safety net. What I did have was fire, the kind that doesn't burn out easily. Jacob and I spent our first winter together in a small apartment where the walls were thin and the heat barely worked. We used to huddle beneath one blanket, whispering dreams into the dark. He'd talk about creating an engine that could power homes efficiently using minimal fuel. I'd talk about starting a company that could change how people thought about sustainable innovation. At that time, our dreams felt like foolish luxuries. We could barely afford dinner most nights. But somehow, hope tasted richer than any meal. There were days when Jacob came home covered in grease, his hands shaking from exhaustion. He worked in a dingy garage to pay the bills, while I worked as a receptionist at a local business incubator. Every day, I watched wealthy entrepreneurs walk past me, their confidence glowing, their perfume filling the air. I promised myself that one day, I'd be one of them, not because of my family name, but because I'd earned it. I took online business courses late at night, while Jacob sketched blueprints on scrap paper. Slowly, our vision took form. We started our company, Heart Innovations, with just $2,000 in savings and an old laptop that overheated every hour. Our first prototype engine blew up, literally, in Jacob's hands. He laughed it off, said, "At least it worked for 10 seconds. But every failure taught us something. Every rejection email from investors hardened my resolve. I stopped being afraid of no, I started craving it. Each one was proof that I was still in the fight." Years passed like that: long nights, short victories, and endless perseverance. Then one day, everything changed. A local startup competition was announced, with a $100,000 prize for the most promising sustainable innovation. We entered without hope, more out of stubbornness than expectation. When our turn came to present, I walked onto that stage in a secondhand blazer and trembling hands. But the moment I started speaking, something inside me shifted. The fear melted away. I talked about how energy poverty affects millions, how innovation could be accessible, how a small dream could ignite a global change. I didn't pitch like a desperate entrepreneur. I spoke like a woman who had nothing left to lose. When we won, I didn't cry. I just stood there in shock, clutching Jacob's hand. The applause echoed in my ears like thunder. That was the moment our lives began to turn. We used the prize money to secure a patent, refine the prototype, and pitch to investors. This time, they listened. Within a year, Heart Innovations became one of the most talked about startups in California. And the irony? The same incubator where I'd once served coffee and answered phones now hosted me as a guest speaker. I remember standing at that podium, looking down at the polished mahogany desk where I used to sit, my voice trembling as I said, "Sometimes, you have to build the doors yourself when no one will open them for you." It was poetic justice, but I wasn't done yet. Because while success filled the headlines, the ghosts of my past still lingered in quiet corners. One evening, my assistant walked in with a hesitant expression. "Emily, there's someone here to see you." When she said their names, I froze. My parents. I hadn't seen them in over 7 years. They entered my glass-walled office like strangers in a museum, cautious, odd, out of place. My father's hair was thinning, his once sharp posture slouched. My mother's eyes darted around nervously, scanning the space like she couldn't quite believe it belonged to me. "It's beautiful," she said softly. I leaned back in my chair. "Thank you. We built it from nothing." My father cleared his throat. "Emily, we heard about your company. It's quite successful. We're proud of you." I studied him. "Proud?" The word sounded hollow. "That's interesting," I said, my tone even. "Because last time we spoke, you said I was throwing my life away." He sighed. "We made mistakes. Your mother and I, we didn't want to lose you. We thought we were protecting you." "Protecting me by abandoning me?" I asked, voice trembling slightly now. "By pretending I didn't exist?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong, Emily. We see that now." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I looked at the people who gave me life, people who had taken so much of it away, and realized something I hadn't before. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't need to, because hate ties you down to the very people who hurt you. And I was finally free. "I forgive you," I said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. I'm not your daughter who needs saving anymore. I saved myself." My father nodded, tears glimmering in his eyes. "You did, Emily. You really did." They left soon after, and I never saw them again. But I didn't need to. That conversation closed a chapter one didn't realize I was still reading. Years passed, and my company grew into a global leader in sustainable energy. Jacob and I built schools, funded startups, and created programs for underprivileged youth, the kind of kids who just needed one chance, one believer. We called the initiative the Heart Foundation. The logo was a simple open heart because power meant nothing if it couldn't heal. And sometimes, late at night, I'd stand on my balcony overlooking the glittering skyline, thinking about that girl in the rain all those years ago, broken, disowned, but defiant. She'd become a woman who owned her destiny. One morning, while preparing for a televised interview, the host asked me off camera, "If you could say one thing to your family, the people who didn't believe in you, what would it be?" I smiled. "Thank you. Because if you hadn't turned your back on me, I would have never learned to stand on my own." The interviewer nodded. "So, your success, it was revenge?" "No," I said softly. "It was resurrection." And as the cameras rolled and the lights shone bright, I felt at peace, truly, completely. Because the best revenge was never about destruction. It was about rebuilding, stronger, wiser, untouchable. I had been their disappointment, their shame, their regret. But now I was their legacy. And that, in the end, was the most poetic justice life could ever write. Months after that unexpected meeting with my parents, the days seemed brighter, yet somehow heavier. Their faces haunted my dreams not out of guilt, but out of something far more complicated, closure that didn't feel quite complete. I had forgiven them, yes. But forgiveness is rarely the same as forgetting. It lingers, soft and sharp all at once. Jacob and I had moved into a glass-walled home in the hills overlooking San Francisco. The house was minimalist, clean lines, soft light, and the kind of silence that hums with satisfaction. But even in that quiet beauty, I sometimes felt a strange ache, like success hadn't fully erased the old wounds. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Jacob came to me with a glass of wine and a grin that still melted me after all those years. "Do you remember the first engine prototype that nearly blew up in our faces?" he asked. I laughed softly. "I still have the burn mark on my sleeve." "We've come a long way," he said. "But, Emily, I think it's time we expand. Not just more factories or patents, but something bigger. Something with purpose." He showed me a proposal for Heart Academy, a scholarship-based technical institute for underprivileged students. A place where dreamers like us could learn, invent, and build futures they weren't born into. I stared at him, overwhelmed. "Jacob, this is everything." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You said once that the world doesn't hand out second chances. Maybe it's our turn to give them." We poured our hearts into the project. The campus rose from an abandoned industrial zone, concrete turned into classrooms, rusted beams into open labs filled with light. Students from broken homes, foster systems, and low-income neighborhoods applied in droves. Every face that walked through those halls reminded me of myself, the girl no one believed in. News outlets started covering our story. The media called me the self-made heiress and the woman who rebuilt herself. I hated those titles, not because they weren't true, but because they simplified everything. They made it sound like my success was inevitable, when in reality, it had been born from tears, doubt, and nights where hope was the only thing I could afford. Then one day, life delivered the kind of full-circle moment that no script could invent. I received an invitation to speak at a national business leadership conference, sponsored by none other than Caldwell Enterprises, the conglomerate my father had once worked for before retiring in disgrace after several failed ventures. At first, I almost declined. But then something inside me, something fierce and poetic, whispered, "No, go. This is your moment." The event was held in New York, in the same grand hotel where my parents used to host charity galas when I was little. Walking into that chandelier-lit ballroom was like stepping into a memory, but this time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter hiding behind the curtains. I was the keynote speaker. When my name was announced, applause rippled across the room. I stepped onto the stage in a sleek black suit, my posture straight, my heart calm. I scanned the crowd, executives, investors, politicians. And there, near the back, sat my father. I recognized him instantly. His once proud expression was softer now, almost humble. For a heartbeat, I froze. Then I smiled. "My name is Emily Hart," I began, my voice steady. "And I wasn't born into wealth. I was born into expectation and disappointment. But sometimes, disappointment is the best foundation for building something extraordinary." I talked about risk, resilience, and the beauty of starting from nothing. About how true success isn't measured by inheritance or influence, but by impact. I spoke not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman who had found her own truth. The audience rose in a standing ovation when I finished. My father stood too, tears glinting in his eyes. For a moment, I thought he might come forward, but he didn't. He just nodded once, slowly, like a silent surrender, an acknowledgement that I had become everything he never imagined I could be. Later that night, after the gala ended, I walked alone through the quiet hotel corridor. My heels echoed softly against marble. I stopped in front of the ballroom doors one last time and whispered to myself, "You made it, Emily. You really made it." When I returned home, life moved in beautiful rhythm. Heart Academy grew, our company expanded into Europe, and I began mentoring young women entrepreneurs, especially those who had been told they weren't enough. One of them, a shy 19-year-old named Sophia, once said, "You talk about success like it's peace, not power." I smiled at her, because that's what real revenge feels like, peace. Years later, Jacob and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner under the stars. He looked at me, eyes soft, and said, "Do you ever miss them? Your family?" I thought about it. Sometimes. But I think I needed them to leave me so I could learn to stay for myself. The years rolled on. My parents both passed away within a year of each other. They left me a letter, short, handwritten, filled with apologies and a note that said, "We always loved you, even when we didn't know how to show it." I cried that night, not from sadness, but from release. In the end, I decided to buy the old family estate, the one where I'd once stood in the rain as they told me to leave. It was falling apart, cracked windows, ivy creeping up the walls, a ghost of its former grandeur. But I didn't demolish it. I restored it. Not as a home, but as a refuge. Today, that estate is a shelter for women and children escaping domestic abuse and homelessness. The sign at the gate reads, "The Hart House, a second chance for those who were told they had none." Every time I walk those halls, I see the ghosts of my past and smile at them. I am no longer the girl who begged to be believed. I am the woman who created belief for others. When people ask me what drives me, I tell them the truth. It's not vengeance that fuels me, I say. It's the memory of being underestimated. And sometimes, When I look out across the gardens that once belonged to people who doubted me, I whisper to the wind, "You are wrong about me." But thank you, because without your rejection, I might never have found myself. The sky feels different now, wide, open, endless. Like the life I built from the ashes. And as the world turns beneath that vast American sky, I know one thing for certain, that my greatest revenge was never proving them wrong. It was becoming everything they said I couldn't be, and doing it with grace. Months after the Hart House opened, news of its impact began spreading beyond local papers. Videos of women sharing how the shelter changed their lives went viral. One of them, a mother who had escaped an abusive marriage, held her daughter's hand and said through tears, "Miss Hart gave me more than a home. She gave me back my dignity." When I saw that clip online, I broke down. I sat on the floor of my office, the same office that once held design plans and patent blueprints, and cried. Jacob walked in quietly, didn't say a word, just knelt beside me and held me close. His warmth felt like safety, the kind I'd never known growing up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the city lights blink like stars fall into earth. I thought about the irony, how I'd once believed revenge meant payback, that success would sting the people who hurt me. But now I realized something deeper. Real revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about living in peace while they drown in their own regret. Weeks later, my assistant came rushing into my office, excitement lighting up her face. "Emily, you've been nominated," she gasped. "For what?" I asked, barely glancing up from the documents I was signing. "The National Women's Leadership Award. The president himself will be at the ceremony." The words hit me like a storm of disbelief. Me, the girl once disowned for loving a man without wealth, was now being recognized for rebuilding lives. The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., in a grand hall lined with marble columns and chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars. Reporters flashed cameras as I walked the red carpet, arm in arm with Jacob. People called out my name, but all I could think of was that night years ago, standing in the rain, suitcase at my feet, hearing my father say, "You've ruined your future." How strange, I thought, that the future he feared for me had become my destiny. When they called my name, the applause was thunderous. I stepped onto the stage, looking out over a sea of faces, senators, entrepreneurs, social activists, and yes, even a few of my family members in the back row. My cousin, now gray-haired and softened by time, gave a trembling smile. My mother's younger sister, the only one who'd sent me letters when I was disowned, wiped her eyes. I took a deep breath. When I was 21, I was told I had thrown my life away because I chose love over wealth. I was told that I'd regret walking away from privilege. But the truth is, I didn't lose privilege that day. I found freedom. The room went silent. Every camera lens focused on me. "I stand here not because I'm extraordinary," I continued, voice steady, "but because I refuse to let other people define my worth." I was called foolish, stubborn, reckless, and maybe I was. But I also refused to believe that love, compassion, and hard work weren't enough. My eyes drifted to the back of the hall. My father wasn't there. He had passed away months earlier, but somehow I felt his presence, heavy and distant, like the echo of an old song. "I dedicate this award," I said softly, "to the people who believed I'd fail. Because without your doubt, I would never have learned to believe in myself." The hall erupted in applause, but all I felt was peace, a deep, quiet peace that filled every corner of my soul. After the ceremony, I stepped out into the crisp night air. The White House lights shimmered faintly in the distance. Reporters called after me, microphones flashing, but I waved them off. Jacob slipped his hand into mine. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled. "No," I said. "We did." We walked through the quiet streets of D.C., the sound of our footsteps mingling with the hum of the city. I thought about the arc of my life, from a disowned daughter to a woman building homes for others. Revenge had started as my weapon. Now it had become my redemption. A few weeks later, I received a call from a TV network executive. They wanted to feature me in a live national broadcast, a night of women who changed America. My story, my foundation, my company, everything. At first, I hesitated. I don't do publicity for revenge, I told them. I do it for purpose. That's exactly why we want you, they said. The day of the broadcast, the studio was buzzing with energy. Lights, cameras, and the quiet pulse of anticipation. They seated me opposite a well-known journalist, calm, kind-eyed, and genuinely curious. When the interview began, she asked softly, "Emily, if your parents could hear you now, what would you say?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I looked directly into the camera as if staring through time itself. I'd tell them that I understand. That they feared poverty because they never believed love could be wealth. But I've learned that the richest people are those who can sleep at night knowing they built their lives with integrity, not inheritance. The studio was silent. The interviewer blinked back tears. "And if you could tell your younger self one thing?" I smiled faintly. "Don't ever let someone convince you that you have to be chosen to be worthy. Choose yourself every time." The clip went viral overnight. Tens of millions of views. People wrote to me from all over the world, daughters, wives, and even mothers who said, "You reminded me that it's never too late to start over." But the message that stayed with me came from a woman named Karen, my mother. I hadn't heard from her in years. Her email was short. "Emily, I watched your interview tonight. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you're happy. That's all I ever wanted for you, even if I didn't know how to show it." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "I am happy, Mom. I hope you are too." I didn't send it right away. I read it again, realized it was enough, and pressed send. That night, I sat by the window, the moon washing my room in silver light. Jacob came in, kissed my temple, and whispered, "You did the right thing." I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder. "Maybe the real revenge," I said quietly, "was learning how to live without hate." He smiled. "That's why you won." And he was right. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about proving my family wrong, it was about proving myself right. About taking every cruel word, every slammed door, and turning it into a key to my own freedom. The girl who once cried in the rain had become the woman who owned the storm. And as dawn broke over the city, painting the horizon in gold, I whispered one final truth to myself. They left me because they couldn't see my worth. But I found it, and I built an empire from it. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. The weeks after the live broadcast felt like living inside a dream. Every morning when I opened my phone, there were new messages, reporters requesting interviews, producers offering book deals, women sharing their stories of struggle and survival. Some sent handwritten letters, the kind that carried emotion in every loop of ink. I read them all. One message, however, stopped me cold. It wasn't from a fan, a journalist, or a charity organizer. It was from my mother. She had watched my broadcast, she wrote, and wanted to see me in person. Not through headlines or emails, but face to face. I sat staring at the screen for what felt like hours. My mind was a swirl of anger and longing, past and present colliding. After all these years, she wanted to talk. The woman who once told me I had embarrassed the family by marrying a nobody was now reaching out like a lost child. For days, I didn't reply. But one evening, as the sun set over the skyline, turning glass towers to fire, I realized something. I didn't want to carry that bitterness forever. So I wrote back, "Meet me at the Willow Cafe this Saturday at noon. It's quiet and the coffee's good." Saturday came. The cafe was a small, cozy spot downtown, filled with soft jazz and the smell of roasted beans. When I walked in, I saw her instantly, my mother, sitting by the window, hands nervously clasped around a cup she hadn't touched. Her once perfect hair was streaked with silver, her posture smaller, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen before, regret. "Emily," she whispered as I approached, her voice trembling. "You look beautiful." I sat down, unsure how to respond. "You look well," I said quietly, even though the truth was written in the fine lines of her face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence carried years of words unsaid, of doors closed and hearts barricaded. Finally, she sighed. "I was cruel to you. Your father and I, we thought we were protecting you. We were afraid you'd lose everything. I stared at her, trying to find anger, but all I felt was sadness. You didn't protect me, Mom. You protected your pride. Her eyes shimmered. I know. I live with that every day. When I saw you on television, I realized the daughter I pushed away became the woman I always wished I could be. That caught me off guard. What do you mean? She smiled weakly. You built something with love, not money. You found peace. I never did. For the first time in years, I saw my mother not as the villain of my story, but as another flawed woman shaped by fear and expectation. We talked for hours about Dad, about the family, about how time changes people in ways apologies can't always fix. And yet, when we stood to leave, I felt lighter, like I'd just let go of a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Outside, she hugged me, awkward at first, then fiercely, like she was afraid I might vanish again. I'm proud of you, she whispered into my hair. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I smiled. Took you long enough. We laughed, the kind of laughter that sounds like healing. Over the next few months, my mother began volunteering at the Heart House. She was good at it, gentle with the women, firm when she needed to be. Watching her talk to the girls there, I realized something profound. People don't always need to change completely to make things right. Sometimes, they just need to show up. As for me, my company grew beyond what I'd imagined. We launched Heart and Rise Foundation, partnering with schools, hospitals, and local governments to create sustainable housing for single mothers. The name became symbolic: Heart for the legacy I carried, Rise for the journey I'd taken from exile to empowerment. Then one afternoon, while reviewing project proposals in my office, my assistant walked in holding a thick envelope. It's from the Hart family law firm, she said cautiously. Your father's estate. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected anything. After all, I was the disowned daughter. But inside the envelope was a letter from the firm, along with a legal document. It read, per the final amendment to his will, Mr. Hart has requested that 50% of his estate be transferred to the Hart Foundation in his daughter's name. I sat back stunned. He'd left half his empire, the one I'd been cut out of, to the very organization I'd built from nothing. It wasn't money that moved me. It was acknowledgement. Silent, posthumous, but real. That night, I visited his grave for the first time. The cemetery was quiet, bathed in silver moonlight. I laid white lilies on the marble headstone and whispered, I forgive you. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain, and for a fleeting moment, I swore I heard his voice, faint but full of pride. You did good, Em. I closed my eyes and smiled through tears. I know, Dad. Finally. Months later, Hart Industries hosted its 10th anniversary gala, a charity event attended by entrepreneurs, politicians, and celebrities. The ballroom glowed with gold and glass, laughter mingling with the sound of violins. As I walked in wearing an elegant silver gown, every camera turned my way. The same reporters who once ignored me now fought for interviews. But I wasn't there to boast. I was there to honor the people who helped me build a dream. As I stood at the podium, I looked around the room and said, 10 years ago, I lost my family because I chose love over wealth. Tonight, I stand here surrounded by a new family, one made of loyalty, compassion, and courage. You are my empire. The applause was thunderous. Across the room, I saw Jacob raising his glass, pride glowing in his eyes. My mother sat beside him, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. And in that sea of light and music, I felt something divine, not the thrill of revenge anymore, but the peace of transformation. When the gala ended, I slipped away from the noise, stepping out into the cool night air. The city skyline shimmered against the stars, and my reflection glowed faintly in the glass doors behind me. I whispered into the breeze, you told me I'd ruin my future, Dad. But I didn't ruin it. I rewrote it. A soft smile curved my lips as I walked toward the waiting car, the sound of distant laughter fading behind me. My revenge had long since turned into legacy, not about winning against them, but winning for myself. And somewhere deep inside, the girl who had once been cast out stood taller than ever, unbroken, unstoppable, unforgettable. Because in the end, my story wasn't about how I proved them wrong. It was about how I learned to never need their approval to be right. And that, after all the tears and trials, was the truest victory of all. The months after the gala were quiet in a way I hadn't expected. The noise of success faded into something softer, the steady hum of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from something or fighting against someone. I was simply living. Every morning, I'd wake before dawn and sit by the window of our penthouse, watching the city lights flicker out as sunlight broke across the skyline. It reminded me of all the nights I'd stared at those same lights from a cheap apartment, wondering if I'd ever belong among them. And now, they stretched before me like old friends. Jacob often joined me there, 2 mugs of coffee steaming between us. He'd kiss the side of my head and say, "You built all this, Em. You made the impossible real." But he never said it with awe or surprise, just quiet certainty. Because he'd always believed in me, even when no one else did. We talked often about expanding the foundation, taking it national, maybe even global. But my heart wasn't chasing empire anymore. It was chasing meaning. I wanted to build schools, shelters, and mentoring programs, not just to show the world what I could do, but to rewrite what love and loyalty could create when the world turns its back on you. And that's what we did. Within a year, the Heart and Rise Foundation had branches in 6 states. Every location had a mural of a phoenix on its wall, rising from the ashes, painted by local artists. It became our emblem, our reminder that sometimes destruction isn't the end, it's the beginning of becoming who you were meant to be. But even in peace, life had a way of testing the edges of healing. One autumn afternoon, while visiting our first shelter in Chicago, I ran into someone I never thought I'd see again, my cousin Natalie. The same cousin who'd once mocked me for marrying Jacob, who had whispered poison into my parents' ears, who'd laughed when they turned me away. She looked different. Older, tired, like life had stripped away her shine. Her designer coat couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. "Emily," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think you'd remember me." "Oh, I remember you," I said with a polite smile. She looked down, fidgeting with her bag strap. "I heard about what you're doing here. It's incredible. I came to ask if there were any openings. I'm looking for work." For a moment, I just stared at her. Years ago, I would have savored this, the poetic reversal, the woman who helped exile me now standing in my shadow, asking for help. But instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: compassion. "Of course," I said quietly. "We always need people who care." She looked up, tears gathering in her eyes. "After everything I said about you, why would you help me?" "Because someone once told me that holding on to hate only keeps you tied to the past," I replied. "And I'm done living there." Her chin trembled. "You've changed." I smiled faintly. "No, I just stopped letting other people write my story." As she walked away to meet the foundation's HR coordinator, I turned toward the mural of the phoenix painted on the shelter wall. Its wings blazed orange and gold against the gray brick. For a long time, I just stared at it, because I finally understood it wasn't only about rising after pain. It was about becoming the light that guides others out of it too. When I got home that evening, the apartment was bathed in the amber glow of sunset. Jacob was on the balcony, his sleeves rolled up, a glass of wine in hand. "How was Chicago?" he asked, smiling as I walked up behind him. "Enlightening," I said, slipping my arms around him. It reminded me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means the past can't hold me anymore. He turned, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "You've come a long way, Mrs. Hart." I laughed softly. "Mrs. Hart. Funny how I used to hate that name." "Now it's yours," he said. "Truly yours." We stood there in silence. The city spread before us like a living constellation. Somewhere below, cars honked, people laughed, life went on, but in that moment, it felt like time belonged only to us. Later that night, I opened my old journal, the one I'd written during the hardest years. The pages were filled with pain, defiance, and dreams that had once felt impossible. I turned to the very last page and picked up a pen. Once upon a time, they told me I'd ruin my life. But the truth is, they gave me the chance to rebuild it on my own terms. I am not the girl they disowned. I am the woman they can never silence. I closed the journal, my heart full, my soul still burning like the city lights outside my window. Weeks later, when my foundation was invited to host a televised charity gala, I agreed. The network wanted me to share my journey. They called it a story of success after betrayal. I called it a story of finding home. The night of the event, as the cameras rolled and the audience applauded, I stood at the podium and said, when they left me, I thought I'd lost everything. But I was wrong. I lost only the illusions. I found strength, love, and purpose, things money can't buy and pride can't destroy. So to anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, prove them wrong by becoming everything they never believed you could be. The applause was deafening. But I wasn't thinking about the audience. I was thinking of the girl I once was, the one who cried in the dark, who felt worthless, who begged to be seen. She finally was. When I walked off stage, my mother was waiting for me in the wings. Her eyes were shining, and her voice trembled as she said, "You didn't just make us proud, Emily. You made me better." And for the first time, I believed her. That night, as I stood outside under the stars, wind tangling through my hair, I realized something simple yet profound. Revenge isn't about watching them suffer. It's about watching yourself rise. And rise I did higher than their doubts, higher than their cruelty, higher than the expectations they used to cage me with. The girl they tried to bury had become the woman who now built empires. And as the lights of the city blinked below, I whispered one final truth into the night. Family doesn't define who you are. Love does. And I chose love even when they didn't choose me. The wind carried my words away, and in that quiet, glowing moment, I knew the story was complete. In the end, it all came full circle. The same people who once looked down on Emily, who had turned their backs when she needed them most, now stood in awe of her. Her parents' voices trembled when they spoke to her, their pride mingled with guilt. Old friends who had vanished suddenly wanted to reconnect, as if success could erase the loneliness she once endured. But Emily wasn't bitter anymore. She had outgrown the need for their approval. She realized that true revenge wasn't humiliation or spite, it was transformation. It was becoming untouchable in her peace, powerful in her kindness, and radiant in her own purpose. She didn't need apologies or validation. She already had everything they said she'd never achieve. Standing on the balcony of her penthouse one cool evening, the city glowing beneath her like a sea of stars, Emily held Jacob's hand. They didn't need to say anything. The silence was rich with all the words that had already been lived: struggle, survival, triumph. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from a relative asking for help. She smiled faintly and set it down. "Let them wait," she murmured, sipping her wine. The world was no longer a place she had to prove herself in, it was a stage she had already conquered. A soft breeze moved through her hair, and in it, she could almost hear the echo of her younger self, the girl who once cried in the dark, begging for love that never came. Emily closed her eyes and whispered, "You made it." And somewhere deep within her soul, she felt that girl's smile back. The city pulsed with life below, the hum of 1,000 stories unfolding, but hers, the story of the woman who turned pain into power, would forever burn the brightest. Because Emily Hart didn't just survive. She rose. And this time, she rose on her own terms.